What if America's most loyal sentinel in the Pacific was secretly building a bridge to its oldest rival? What if the very strategy designed to make America strong again was, in fact, pushing its closest allies into the arms of its greatest competitor? This is not a hypothetical scenario from a political thriller. It is a high-stakes geopolitical drama unfolding right now, a direct consequence of an economic war waged from the White House. The return of Donald Trump to the Oval Office in January 2025 heralded a new, aggressive chapter in global trade. Reviving his America First doctrine with renewed vigor, President Trump wielded the International Emergency Economic Powers Act like a sledgehammer, imposing sweeping tariffs of 25% on key Japanese exports, automobiles, electronics, and machinery. For Japan, a nation whose economic lifeblood depends on the $700 billion in goods it sends to the U.S. annually, this was not a warning shot. It was a direct hit, projected to wipe out $40 billion in the first 6 months alone. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force Japan into an impossible choice: endure economic strangulation or make a pact with the devil, embarking on a secret diplomatic course that would ignite a firestorm of fury in Washington and potentially redraw the map of global alliances for a generation. The American Hammer: how tariffs forced Japan's hand. When the tariffs hit in March 2025, the impact on Japan's economy was immediate and severe. Industry titans like Toyota and Sony sounded the alarm, their profit margins evaporating as complex supply chains shuttered and the yen's value gyrated wildly. For Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, already navigating a fragile political coalition and domestic scandals, the pressure was immense. The American market, a cornerstone of Japan's post-war prosperity, was suddenly becoming prohibitively expensive. The initial response was one of negotiation. After months of intense talks, the two nations announced the U.S.-Japan Strategic Trade and Investment Agreement on July 22, 2025. Hailed by President Trump as the largest trade deal in history, it provided a measure of relief for Tokyo, reducing the crippling 25% tariff to a more manageable 15% on most exports. But this relief came at a staggering price. In return, Japan agreed to a monumental pledge: $550 billion in investment over the next decade into U.S. critical sectors like semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and electric vehicle batteries. To manage this colossal capital flow, a new U.S.-Japan Investment Authority was established, endowed with a crucial and controversial feature: veto power for the U.S. Treasury over which projects received funding. On the surface, it was a win. Early implementations promised over 50,000 American jobs, with companies like Panasonic committing $20 billion to EV partnerships. But beneath the celebratory press releases, a deep-seated anxiety festered within Japanese official circles. They feared a profound loss of economic autonomy. This fear was publicly ignited when U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick bluntly stated that Japan had surrendered. The comment, whether a gaffe or a deliberate provocation, confirmed Tokyo's worst suspicions and lit the fuse for what was to come. The secret pivot: Japan's hedge against American unpredictability. Even as the ink dried on the U.S.-Japan deal, a parallel, clandestine strategy was already in motion. The sheer volatility of the Trump administration and the humiliating terms of the surrender deal had convinced key figures in Tokyo that putting all their economic eggs in the American basket was a recipe for long-term vulnerability. The solution? A quiet, yet seismic, outreach to their historical rival, China. In a series of tightly guarded meetings, Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa and her Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi, engaged in back-channel discussions. Leaked diplomatic cables from February 2025 revealed a groundbreaking understanding: a mutual agreement to sideline their bitter territorial dispute over the Senkaku/Diaoyu Islands in the interest of broader economic cooperation. For Japan, the prize was access to China's vast market and, crucially, a secure supply of rare earth minerals, elements vital for its world-leading technology sector that China effectively controls. This bilateral courtship soon expanded into a trilateral framework with the inclusion of South Korea, another U.S. ally reeling from Trump's tariff onslaught. On March 22, 2025, the trade ministers of Japan, China, and South Korea met in Seoul, officially reviving long-stalled talks for regional economic cooperation. The outcome was the creation of a $100 billion regional infrastructure fund, focused on projects that would deliberately reduce their collective dependence on the West. The fund would finance green energy grids, high-speed digital networks, and EV battery plants, often bypassing American technology standards. For South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol, it was pragmatic diversification, with companies like Hyundai eyeing $15 billion in joint ventures in China. For Japan, it was an economic lifeline and a bold declaration of strategic independence. The fury in Washington. Accusations of betrayal and double-dealing. When news of the Trilateral Pact broke, the reaction from the Trump White House was volcanic. On September 5, 2025, the president took to social media, unleashing a torrent of fury against Japan. He accused Tokyo of cozying up to China, while American taxpayers shouldered the burden of its regional defense. Inside the Oval Office, reports described a president enraged by what he labeled Japan's double-dealing, feeling personally betrayed just months after securing the $550 billion investment pledge. The retaliation was swift. A planned October summit with Prime Minister Kishida was abruptly postponed. Trump threatened to reinstate the full 25% tariffs unless Japan immediately ceased its engagement with Beijing. Vice President J.D. Vance amplified the message in media appearances, branding the Trilateral Pact a stab in the back and calling for congressional investigations into Japanese lobbying efforts in Washington. The political and social media sphere erupted into a fierce debate. Was Japan's move a necessary act of economic self-preservation or a profound betrayal of a decades-old alliance? The narrative of a disloyal ally, publicly championed by the administration, took hold in many quarters, framing Japan's actions as a shift in allegiance rather than a complex strategic hedge. The pragmatic calculus. Why Japan is walking the tightrope. Despite the heated rhetoric from Washington, a cold, pragmatic calculus underpins Japan's daring maneuver. Analysts argue that this is not a betrayal of the U.S. alliance. It is a rational response to overwhelming economic pressure. The facts are stark. China has already surpassed the United States as Japan's largest trading partner. Trump's tariffs, which averaged 18% across sectors and spiked to 30% on specific goods like copper, were projected to shave 0.3% off Japan's GDP growth in 2025. In this context, diversifying economic relationships is not a choice. It is a national imperative. Crucially, Japan's move is one of economic hedging, not a wholesale strategic realignment. Even as it forged closer economic ties with Beijing, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force was participating in joint naval exercises with the U.S. and the Philippines in the contested waters of the South China Sea, a clear signal that its security commitment to Washington remains ironclad. Japan is not abandoning its American security umbrella. It is simply refusing to let that umbrella dictate its entire economic future. This balancing act has deep historical roots. The trade tensions of the 1980s, when Japan faced American-imposed auto quotas and the Plaza Accord, created a legacy of resentment and a keen awareness of its vulnerability to U.S. economic policy. The 2025 scenario is a modern, more intense echo of that dynamic, compelling Japan to build a financial buffer against American unpredictability. The ripple effect, global consequences, and the New World Order. Japan's High-Wire Act is sending shockwaves far beyond the Pacific. Other Asian nations are watching closely and learning. Countries like Vietnam and Indonesia, while negotiating their own relief pacts with the U.S., are simultaneously upgrading regional trade agreements to insulate themselves from future tariff shocks. The era of unquestioned economic alignment with America is over. The new watchword is multi-alignment. For American consumers, the consequences are already tangible. Estimates suggest Trump's tariff regime cost the average U.S. household an additional $1,300 annually, with prices for electronics and EVs rising by as much as 57%. Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund projects that the new China-led deals could boost Japan's GDP by 0.3%, highlighting the clear economic incentive for Tokyo's pivot. The trilateral pact itself is poised to evolve, with analysts forecasting a full free trade agreement by 2027 that could reroute over $200 billion in regional trade flows. In this new landscape, China stands to gain the most, solidifying its position as the indispensable economic hub of Asia. A betrayal or a masterstroke? So, is Japan's secret deal a stab in the back? The evidence suggests a more nuanced truth. It is not a betrayal, but a masterstroke of pragmatic statecraft in an increasingly volatile world. Forced into a corner by an ally's aggressive economic policies, Japan has executed a delicate but decisive maneuver to secure its own prosperity. It is navigating the most challenging geopolitical environment in decades by doing what it must to survive and thrive, maintaining its vital security alliance with the United States while forging necessary economic partnerships wherever it finds them, even if that means shaking hands with its historical rival. The Pacific century is being rewritten before our eyes. The old order, with America at its unchallenged center, is fracturing, giving way to a more complex, multipolar world where alliances are fluid and self-interest is the ultimate compass. Japan is not pivoting away from America, but it is unequivocally refusing to be anchored by it alone. The message to Washington is clear. Loyalty can no longer be taken for granted, and even the closest of allies will act in their own national interest when pushed too far. The world is watching, and the balance of power is shifting in real time.